Good morning. Welcome to Destination Jamaica. We are continuing our series, Out of Many One People, where we speak about the people who came here. We touched on the Indians the last time, and now we're about to do the Chinese. Now we found a very old article from the Gleaner. We hope it's very useful to you. Now let's get into it. The beginnings of how the Chinese came to Jamaica. So, the story of the Chinese in Jamaica is linked to Panama and railways. In the mid 19th century, many Chinese looked west to California, answering the call of the gold rush, and to Panama, where laborers were required for the building of a railroad from Panama City to Colon. Both options promise improvement in their lives and those of their children and led many Chinese to break the law and leave China prior to 1891. Now, that year is significant because the Chinese government officially allowed immigration in that year. The first large group of 267 Chinese immigrants came from Hong Kong on July 30, 1854, just months before those from Panama and a ship called Epsom. They were destined for indentureship. So later that year, 205 Chinese workers demanded to leave Panama, fearing yellow fever. They arrived in Jamaica on November 1st and 18th on ships called the Vampire, what a name, 195 people, and the Teresa Jane, 10 people, respectively. So the authorities in Panama sent them to nearby Jamaica solely due to how close it is and in exchange for Jamaican laborers. Many were already ill on arrival and were sent to the hospital in Kingston, where they eventually died. Less than 50 immigrants survived. Of these, one, Robert Jackson Chin, opened a wholesale house on downtown Kingston, Petron Street, where the Desnos and Geddes building now stands. In doing so, he unknowingly paved the way for many of his countrymen. Two others, Chang Si Pa and Lin Sam, opened grocery stores nearby. All three men provided guidance to successful batches of immigrants. So that's pretty interesting. So they came here due to trying to get away from the yellow fever in Panama, right? And from there, one man say, you know what, I'm open a store downtown, and him open the wholesale, and two other follow him, and then it starts the beginning of the whole retail wholesale industry of Chinese being in Jamaica. Now let's move on to the indentureships and the rise of Chinese grocery. So a decade later, in the 1860s, another set of Chinese arrived from Trinidad and British Guiana. There they had worked as indentured laborers in the cane fields until hurricane and insects threatened their job security. Some 200 Chinese workers answered a call for 3-year contract laborers in Jamaica to tend to the American led large scale planting of coconuts, bananas, and sugar. When their 3-year contracts were up, some continued in the fields even though they were not welcome with open arms by the newly emancipated slaves who saw them as competition. Others started small shops of their own where total weekly sales tended to amount to less than £8 on average. By this time, Chinese grocers were becoming known for extended credit to favored customers, selling by barter, providing round the clock service, and selling goods in small, affordable quantities. It is as a result of their importation activities that items such as rice, saltfish, salt meats, flours, and cornmeal became staples of the Jamaican diet. So their community continued to grow, and in the 1860s, a close-knit Jamaican Chinese community began to, emerge, with many living aboard, behind, or somewhere near to their shops. Downtown, a retail area, became known as Chinatown. 2 decades later, in the 1880s, another group of 680 immigrants arrived, this time directly from China. They had been recruited as farm laborers, right? They were 501 men, 105 women, 54 boys, and 17 girls who docked in Kingston Harbor in 1884 after having survived a typhoon aboard the 67-day voyage. Upon arrival, they were claimed by the plantation owners who held their contracts and scattered across the island. Among this group was Ching Tong, who in 1891 would find the Chinese Benevolent Society to offer humanitarian and social aid as well as protect Chinese customs and preserve their ethnic identity at 131 Barry Street in downtown Kingston. Following 1885 large-scale immigration of Chinese laborers occurred in an attempt to satisfy the demand for field labor created by the departure of the African, Jamaican, and East Indian laborers from the plantations. This fourth wave of immigrants totaled close to 700. Some came without contracts and were thus able to choose their occupation, which was generally divided between farming and the retail grocery trade. These immigrants, like many of those who had come before, were not generally well received by Jamaicans, and so they tended to stick together. There were racial slurs, some were held in Spanish Town on arrival under armed guard until they were shipped out in mule carts to various plantations. Now, of course, like every group, the Chinese they faced challenges. In 1888, more than 800 additional Chinese arrived, and the Jamaican business community began to get nervous, fearful that they would lose control of the retail grocery trade. They lobbied the Jamaican government to impose the first in a set of immigration law that would make it difficult for Chinese immigrants to come to the island. The new restrictions went into effect in 1905. Immigrants were now required to register with the authorities and provide a guarantee from a reliable person as to the soundness of their characters. In 1910, new and even harsher conditions were added. Chinese immigrants arriving subsequent to that date had to pay a £30 deposit upon landing and also pass a physical and a test showing that they could write and speak 50 words in 3 different languages. This made it more difficult, but not impossible, for already settled Chinese Jamaicans to send for their relatives. By the mid 1920s, the total number of Chinese who immigrated to Jamaica numbered close to 4,000. By 1930, an additional 2,000 Chinese have arrived. In 1931, however, the Jamaican government issued a decree that no passport was to be issued to Chinese coming to Jamaica, excepting to those under 14 years old who were allowed student permits. This was largely a result of ill will towards the Chinese, who by this time branched out into restaurants and bakeries and laundries, in addition to retail groceries. They were doing well on the island, contributing to national development while providing for the families. In the 1930s, during the labor riots, not surprisingly, many Chinese groceries were looted and robbed, and in some cases, their owners murdered. This decree stood until 1947, when the Chinese consulate, established in the 1920s and largely supported by the Jamaican Chinese community in Kingston, succeeded in persuading the Jamaican government to relax these restrictions, remove the quota system that had been placed on wives and children and parents, and allowed Chinese immigrants to send for their family members. Interesting, right? It's also someone's perspective. So if you know anything more about this period, please comment below. We love learning from you. Now let's move on to the Jamaican Chinese. By this time, in the 1940s, many of the second generation, those who were truly Jamaican Chinese, began to rebel against their parents' desires to remain wedded to Chinese culture. They left the family business, went into other professions, and embraced aspects of Jamaican culture. Many also converted to Roman Catholicism. Resentment from African Jamaicans won as tolerance of aspects of Chinese culture grew, and some, combinations occurred. One of the most notable examples is the numbers game Drop Pan. Drop Pan in Cantonese Jifa and Hakka Sufa is named for the fact that tickets numbered 1 to 36 are dropped in a pan to see who wins. Many players play based on dreams and portions. Also, some played by odds based on a study of the pattern of the play. Drop Pan is said to have arrived in Jamaica with the earliest Chinese immigrants in the 1850s. It was restricted by the government as early as 1898. This law was amended in 1920s due to the game's popularity. Today, Drop Pan's meanings are most likely both Chinese and Afro-Jamaican in origin. So according to Barry Shevans, in a Jamaican journal article on Drop Pan, the number 7 means married woman and hog. In Chinese custom, a son-in-law makes a gift of a pig or pork to his mother-in-law every New Year. The number 11 means baby boy and dog. Among the Chinese, the dog is a blessing, as are newborn males. The number 8 stands for belly, and so forth. So you get the gist of it, how it comes to represent similar or both cultures. Now, despite some Jamaicanization, the Chinese have also worked hard to maintain links to their culture, which is very evident, right? So you see how cultured they are. The Chinese, you see them in the stories. You might have, be descendants of Chinese. You might have friends and family as Chinese members. They're pretty much still linked to their culture. Be it's the language or the practices, they are pretty much proud of who they are. So that's a little bit about the Chinese. There's much more. We're going to speak about 7 contributions that they made in another video because we're running very long. It's a few 50 minutes. So we'll do another video on the 7 contributions that they made to Jamaican culture. Let us know what you think about this. We love to hear your opinions, and looking forward to reading any information that you have on the Jamaican Chinese. Thank you so much for watching, liking, sharing, subscribing. We have so much more coming your way. Do have a blessed one. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.